All right, welcome back for today's episode of the IBS Freedom Podcast. There's going to be a surprisingly spooky little Easter egg later in this episode. Amy already knows because I read this to her just moments ago, but stay tuned if you want to know the spooky side of niacin. Amy, do you have an opening line for vitamin B3? Would you say it's important, oh dietitian of mine?
Yeah, for sure. I was doing a little bit of reading too, just before we hopped on earlier today, just to prep, because we've been prepping lately. Look at us. Look at us go. But what's interesting, one of the sites that I went to said that niacin is actually needed in 400 enzyme reactions in the body, and it's the most of any other vitamin.
So she's kind of a big deal.
She is a big deal. And I think when I think of niacin, I think of like ATP and energy. It's probably the most important nutrient. If you had to pick one, you need more of it than a lot of the other nutrients needed. Like thiamine and riboflavin, we've talked about in the preceding episodes. Those are definitely needed too. But you need niacin in higher amounts. And it's, again, to me, it's just whenever I think of ATP and energy, I'm going to think of niacin, but it also has some other really important roles not related to energy metabolism that might get less press, but are very important too. So I'm excited to jump into niacin. Yeah. Do you have any opening thoughts about niacin?
Yeah.
She's cute.
I think she's fetch.
Yeah.
We're going to make fetch happen. Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head that niacin is especially important for energy metabolism and making ATP, which is like the body's energy currency. And I think of niacin and riboflavin as probably like the number one and number two in this, because when you draw out the Krebs cycle in school and they teach you all of those reactions, it's basically niacin and riboflavin all the way around the circle.
Right.
But that really brings to mind clinically, like most of our listeners don't actually give a shit about the Krebs cycle, and they've never drawn the Krebs cycle, and they don't care to draw the Krebs cycle, which is fine. I kind of loved it, but that's fine.
You're wrong. Just kidding.
What might be important to our listeners is energy production is going to directly tie into things like, fatigue, brain fog, nervous system not working quite right. So you could certainly conjure up ideas of anxiety, depression, mood, sleep problems, but also, as I think we mentioned in the previous couple episodes, the gut-brain axis is so important for gut function. Like, your gut doesn't do much of anything completely on its own. It's the vagus nerve, aka a big arm of the gut-brain axis, telling your gut to make stomach acid, make enzymes, make and secrete bile, run the migrating motor complex, run your motility, do all of the stuff, heal the gut lining, aka leaky gut healing. It's you need that gut-brain axis to work correctly and do its job well if you want gut function to go smoothly. But then the nervous system is this huge energy hog. I think we talked about it in the last episode or two. The brain weighs 2, maybe 3 pounds, but it sucks up about 20% of your energy for the day. Like, you've got this gloop in your head that's sucking up a lot of your energy. And if you are chronically short on energy because of something like B vitamin deficiency or just under eating in general, good luck getting any of your neurologic function working right. That's my opener.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, it's interesting. We were talking beforehand how Chris Masterjohn, his paid Substack, I was kind of reviewing some of the niacin information he has on there. And it's great. I think for a lot of nutrients, he has like a little short video just about them, like risk of deficiency, who might need more, like all the sort of ins and outs. And they're very good. So I'd highly recommend, if you're like a nerd on this stuff, to check him out. But in his video, the way he labeled niacin, he said, like, if you want a happy brain if you want good skin and you want a healthy gut, then niacin's really important. And the way he kind of described it is niacin is needed to release neurotransmitters. So like your neurotransmitters can't function well, and you need neurotransmitters for gut function. You need it for the brain to function optimally, for the nerves to communicate, like all this stuff. You need neurotransmitters to be releasing properly for the gut-brain axis to work effectively. So that's really interesting, even beyond the ATP situation. I think, too, another thing that he talked about is that niacin's really needed for DNA repair. And so that's why it's talked a lot about with skin. We'll probably get into it, like the big deficiency, which most people are not going to have pellagra, but that's sort of the big condition that comes into play. If you have severe deficiency of niacin, you have pellagra. And it often is like this rash or like not able, it's almost like a sunburn almost. It's sort of interesting. You know, the reason you can get this rash is that there's not enough niacin to repair the DNA to help with that recovery. So you just kind of get this like rashiness that's awful. And again, if your skin won't be healthy and can't recover from things like sunburns actually deplete niacin because you need to be able to repair that tissue, and niacin is needed for that tissue repair. But so skin, you need it for skin. We talked about brain, skin. And then Chris Mastrian points out that you need it for the gut because the gut is turning over every 2 to 3 days. So
that's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
Much like the skin, which is a high turnover rate tissue, you're sloughing off skin cells all day, every day. Every time you touch your skin, you're also sloughing off epithelial cells in the gut lining every couple of days. So
continue. So you need the ATP to help repair that tissue. So you need it from an energy production standpoint and like having enough energy to repair that tissue, but you also need it just from like a DNA repair, repairing that tissue standpoint to be able to have optimal GI function. And that is something that you see in deficiency, like especially extreme deficiency is usually like the pellagra, like when there actually is outright deficiency, which people could have like suboptimal levels, which we can talk about the difference, but it's sometimes helpful just to see like what does an outright deficiency bring, and then you can kind of utilize that as like, okay, this is maybe what it would look like if you were in like the suboptimal range. But there's something, I still remember it from school, the like 4 Ds. I think it's like dementia, dermatitis, diarrhea, and death.
Yep. Death.
I know, it's kind of crazy, but like it really covers all those bases. Like your neurology is not going to work well if you're niacin deficient. Your skin's not going to heal very well.
Maybe even we could add like your external barriers.
Yeah.
And that would encompass things like the gut barrier.
For sure. So, and I think again, like diarrhea is a sign of niacin deficiency. So if there is an issue getting enough niacin in, or even making enough niacin, because we could get into that too, you could have a problem with diarrhea just specifically because of a niacin deficiency. And I don't know how common that is. That's the interesting thing about working in the space nutritionally, because I feel like my role is just to really help ensure people are getting all the nutrients on board. And usually if someone is deficient in niacin, they're probably deficient in a bunch of stuff. So it's hard for me to be like, oh, I'm not someone that's throwing in like a niacin supplement by itself and saying, oh, they're getting better. But I do know, again, as you start to build up levels of all the micronutrients, including niacin, things like diarrhea and gut issues get a lot better. And it might not be simply because of the niacin, but it could be in part.
That's the thing that makes nutrition research so hard, right? And maybe you could speak to this a little bit more being a dietitian, but the two things that seem to make nutrition research really, really hard to do is A, you very rarely get a true placebo, at least when you're dealing with real food, right? Like the people in your research study know if they're the ones eating the broccoli or if they're in the group without the broccoli.
Right.
So, that sort of stuff is really hard to do with nutrition. Actually, another factor is that human beings are notoriously awful at estimating what food we actually are taking in.
Right.
I've experienced this. I kid you not. I've done so much chronometer over the years, and I've done enough nutrition stuff with myself that I should theoretically know this. To this day, I still am incapable of eyeballing what 2 tablespoons of peanut butter actually looks like.
Right.
Or nuts. If I'm eating pistachios or almonds or something, I've just kind of gotten in the habit in recent years of always using the kitchen scale, because I will take a big scoop of peanut butter and I'll think, yeah, that's 2 tablespoons. That's 1 serving. Absolutely. And then I measure it and I'm like, oh, damn, that's 4 tablespoons.
Right.
Whoa. And the same thing, like I measure out what I think is 1 ounce of pistachios or whatever. And it's like, oh no, that's almost 2 ounces, 2 servings.
Right.
So anyway, my point is, there's very rarely a placebo in nutrition research, and that makes it very challenging. Number 2 is that human beings notoriously suck at self-assessing their nutrition. So when they do like food diaries or, ask people to eat a certain way, how compliant they are with that and like what they're actually taking in and how good your data is really a huge wild card. But then another one that you touched on is that usually whole foods are going to have multiple nutrients in them. So it's really, really hard to find people who have just an isolated niacin deficiency, but they are totally replete in all of the other vitamins and minerals. And then you could give them one magical food that only contains niacin and nothing else major. Like that really isn't a thing. You would only ever see that if we treat the nutrients kind of like pharmaceuticals and we give them a supplement. But even that, like, you're not going to find somebody with a singular niacin insufficiency. Like, I don't think that really exists.
Yeah. And I will say too, like, people aren't really testing for niacin. Like it's not like a vitamin D gets tested on blood work all the time. So I really feel like we don't have good data on how common deficiency is. Like, it is interesting. I went and looked at like national health data on this, and they were like, oh, less than 1% has deficiency. But I believe they used like, they just used recall, like food recall data, and then put like, oh, we think that they're getting this much niacin in, and therefore it's not something that people struggle to get in their diet. But it doesn't really show you like how well people are actually making niacin from tryptophan, which we can talk about, or like individual differences. Like if someone's having a lot of DNA damage or tissue damage or something, they would need more niacin for healing.
Sure. If
your gut's been kind of on an onslaught, I know IBD is something that can have low niacin because, again, if your tissue's being damaged, your one might not absorb it as well, but 2, you're going to be using it more. Just like, again, how I mentioned, if you're someone that's getting sunburned a lot or a lot more sun damage, you will need more niacin to heal that tissue. So we can't really assess very well, I think, like maybe some other nutrients that we have more data on, like where people's levels actually are in the population, which makes it a little bit tricky too.
Yeah, no, I think you make a good point. And I'm going to say right now, I'm going to go on record, I call absolute bullshit that only 1% of people have trouble getting niacin in their diet. A, because I've seen more than that in my practice, let alone, other practices. But also, and we can cover this next in a moment if you want, when we talk about the foods that contain niacin and what your daily need for niacin actually is, I think there's one group of people or like one group of people following a particular type of diet in particular that would be highly likely to be deficient or at least insufficient in this nutrient. And I guarantee that they make up a lot more than 1% of the general population. Yeah. So I'm calling BS.
Again, like I think that's, I read it and was like, this doesn't, maybe if again, you're using just traditional, like, oh, this has this much. But again, there's issues with that too. One thing Chris Masterjohn brought up, which I found really interesting, is that he thinks women need more niacin than men do, especially at particular periods of time. He said estrogen increases the conversion of tryptophan to niacin. So like you make more niacin at different parts of the cycle. And like during pregnancy, you probably need more niacin. So the body is like, ooh, we need more niacin. We're going to upregulate that. And estrogen gets increased and you make more niacin. So his argument was that women might need more niacin at particular points in time. And if you are going through even menopause and you're not making as much estrogen, that you might actually have higher needs for niacin.
For actually taking it in like preformed niacin from your food.
Right. So he kind of talks a little bit about that as well, as, you know, like, ooh, during times where estrogen isn't as high, maybe you need, like you said, more preformed and not as much tryptophan converted into niacin.
Yeah. And maybe it's just worth briefly mentioning, although I don't think that it's going to be too influential for our audience, and I don't expect normal people to like do the calculations in their head, but just briefly, we should mention that niacin is one of the, 2 vitamins that we are capable of producing ourselves in the body.
Yeah.
The other one being vitamin D. You can make some niacin from tryptophan, which is an amino acid, which is one of the building blocks of protein. So your ability to make niacin is highly dependent on your protein intake, both the quantity and quality of the protein that you're eating.
Yeah, for sure.
So this also could be a callback to what we've said before, which is kind of the hierarchy of nutritional counseling. Number 1, are you getting enough calories? If not, start there. If you are, then go on to carbs, protein, fat, fiber. Look at those. If you're getting those in reasonable, good quantities, then you can move on to the nitty-gritty of the vitamins and minerals. But eating enough protein is going to actually help you produce more of this vitamin in-house, so to speak.
Yeah, for sure.
And again, there are calculations, but I don't think normal people need to think about that.
Yeah, and I think, which I think is it's always good to sort of diversify your investments, so to speak, from a nutritional standpoint. So it's one thing that Chris Masterjohn did mention too in that video, which I think was a good call out, is like, you don't really want to just rely necessarily on protein to equal all your niacin. You know, you might want to still have niacin based food sources to help give you kind of a more comprehensive, more like like a more comprehensive strategy to keep your niacin intake up versus just relying, especially for women, he was saying, because like there could be different periods of time where you're better at making it compared to others just because of the estrogen. But and some people genetically might have a harder time making niacin from tryptophan. The other thing is that we need other nutrients to convert tryptophan into niacin. Most importantly, iron, B6, and riboflavin are probably the most important for that conversion. So like if you're iron deficient, which is so common in our patient population, you might have a hard time making niacin from tryptophan until you get those other nutrients up. So just another reason why you don't want to just necessarily focus solely on, you know, oh, I have a niacin issue, I'm just going to focus on niacin. You need to make sure you're getting a wide array of nutrients because it'll help you overall.
Well, they're all connected.
Right.
Again, the irony of this series that we're doing right now is that we are teaching you the nutrition in a very like westernized kind of way where it's this molecule does this thing, here's where it's found, and you can you could make a spreadsheet and have a column for niacin, a column for riboflavin, a column for whatever. But that's not really how it works in the body. Like all of these nutrients interact with other nutrients. So when you start pulling on one corner of the web, you move the whole damn web.
Right.
And you know, it's like you said, you need other vitamins and minerals and protein to make niacin in the body. And they're all going to kind of influence each other. So it's also kind of going back to what we said earlier, which is there's probably nobody right now in this country, at least, who just has a singular niacin deficiency, absolutely nothing else. They've got plenty of riboflavin, plenty of pyridoxine, plenty of whatever, and they just have the singular deficiency. I really don't think that we live in a time that exists anymore. But a niacin deficiency or insufficiency compounded with other nutritional deficiencies, compounded with stress, shitty sleep, lack of movement, et cetera, like that is a very real world thing that happens. And I think it happens more frequently than we think.
Yeah, for sure.
For funsies though. Sorry, you just half opened your mouth and then I cut you off. Sorry. I did want to share this. I shared a little bit from this chart from the Nutrivore book in the last episode too, but I'll just make mention of it. So in this book, right out the gate in the first few pages, she has a table from a 2011 article looking at the proportion of American adults consuming less than the estimated average requirement of that particular nutrient. And it goes through the list, and niacin is on the table at 11.7%. And I will also throw out there, this is a study that's now, 14 years old? Like, that's not super new research. And I, for one, don't think that people's nutrition has gotten better in the last 14 years. I think, if anything, it continues to get worse.
Yeah.
So that's, I would say, at least a 1 in 10 chance, if you're listening to this episode right now, that you are undershooting niacin. Yeah. But maybe segueing into where niacin is found in food, I would make the argument that if you are a vegan, vegetarian, or primarily plant-based eater, I think you have a really high risk of undershooting this vitamin. And you super need to pay attention to this.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's ways to get around it potentially, for sure.
I think you have to work harder though.
Oh, for sure. And I do think just in general, that's one thing that is sometimes maybe hard to hear if you're falling in that category. Because I do think you can definitely make veganism or vegetarianism work, but it does become more effort and you have to be really kind of on top of your game. And I think niacin is a good example of that you would never think of. You think of iron, you think of B12, maybe omega-3s being maybe harder zinc. To get. Yeah, being harder to get on a vegan vegetarian diet. But I agree. I think that this could be a tricky one. I think that and I think there's a lot of people that just might eat a little bit too low a protein that could be at risk even.
Well, yeah. And then you're not making it yourself either.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and if I may too. So why I say that, let me bust out my textbook like a dork again. But under sources, let's start by saying that the RDA for niacin is 14 milligrams for women and 16 for men. That's generally what's recommended. And they say, so keep those numbers in the back of your brain. The best sources of niacin include most meat and fish. A 3-ounce serving of tuna or halibut provides 11.3 milligrams or 6.1 milligrams of niacin, respectively. Beef and pork contain 4.5 to 7.2 milligrams of niacin per 3 ounce. A 3-ounce chicken breast provides 11.8 milligrams. 3 ounces of white turkey meat contains 5.7 milligrams of niacin. Beef liver is especially rich with about 15 milligrams of niacin per 3-ounce serving. Veal has 8.9 milligrams. And then listen to the stark contrast. Then they say a cup of spaghetti provides 2.3 milligrams. A cup of white or brown rice, enriched white or brown rice, is 1.3. Peanut butter is 4.3. So you start getting into the plant-based foods and you see a really steep drop-off, not only in the niacin itself, but the protein. Really, if you want the most bang for your buck, niacin-wise, you're going to be getting that from meat or seafood. And so, again, I really wonder about plant-based eaters and whether they're able to get enough of this through their diet on a consistent day-to-day basis.
Yeah, and I think like what's always hard to factor into this whole situation too is that sometimes the databases are often skewed too, meaning depending on the food, sometimes it could be harder to extract the niacin in food. One thing that I still remember, like back in the day when I'd follow some of the Weston A. Pricey type stuff, they'd talk a lot about like sprouting or properly preparing grains, because niacin is one of those nutrients that's harder to extract. And I know even like one of the big things we talked about in dietetic school is how, like, I think Indians would properly prepare corn by like putting lime on them, and you could extract the niacin much better when it was treated with lime. Versus when you stop doing that, the niacin doesn't come out. And I think there was like maybe an outbreak of pellagra or something when they stopped doing that. And I forget all the ins and outs, but
so I think what it was, because I think I was seeing this on the Nutrivore site when I was brushing up on there. So I don't think it's that the Native Americans stopped processing the corn correctly. I think the process is called nixtamalization, if I remember right. It's when
we stopped. We never did it.
Corn. Yeah. Well, it's when Europeans brought corn over to Europe and they started eating corn and they weren't preparing it correctly.
Right.
And actually that segues into the spooky fact about niacin. Ooh, I titillated you in the beginning of the episode and now you know. So on the Nutrivore website, if you go to the page for Europe or for niacin, not Europe, basically, she says that although less common today, pellagra was endemic in Europe in the 1700s due to widespread corn cultivation, while corn in the Americas was traditionally prepared with methods that make the niacin become bioavailable. Those methods didn't carry over to Europe, and corn-eating populations were left unknowingly niacin deficient. Fascinatingly, there's reason to believe that niacin deficiency contributed to the origin of vampire folklore. Pellagra symptoms resemble many attributes ascribed to vampires, including sensitivity to sunlight, insomnia, erratic behavior, aggression, and delirium. And vampire legends famously arose from corn-eating areas of Eastern Europe around the same time pellagra was striking those regions. How bizarre is that? Yeah. Fun fact of the day, I guess. But so you can get niacin from plant foods. It's just not going to be in nearly the same abundance. And potentially you're going to need to process the food correctly to actually get the niacin out of it.
Yeah.
Shout out, by the way. So I follow a bunch of forager people on Instagram. That's like one of my hobbies now. As you remember when I visited you in Ohio and I was frolicking at the edge of the forest, like looking at all the plants and stuff. There's this couple, their handle is Homegrown Hand Gathered, and they live in Pennsylvania, and they grow corn as one of their crops. And they have several videos about nixtamalization, and they mix the corn and water with some wood ash. And that's one way that you could do it. And then basically you cook it for a while with the wood ash, and then you like strain it out and kind of rinse off the corn, and then you could process it into flour or whatever.
Yeah. I think like how cool though is that the Indians kind of knew what to do. That like internal wisdom sort of passed down. I think too, like I wonder if people started getting diseased and then they just figured it out by trial and error. I imagine that's what it was. Yeah, it's just kind of wild. I remember one story, I forget where I read it or heard about it, where Indians knew that if someone had vitamin C signs, that they would give them, like they would find the adrenal, or I think it was the adrenal gland, which is really high in vitamin C. And it's like it's so tiny in animals, and they would find it and give it to people. Like it's crazy how you would make that tribal knowledge of like knowing that that's going to help with these symptoms. It's just wild.
Isn't that funny? Well, and I'll throw out there, I think that a lot of cultures in the world still have at least some of that knowledge that we've kind of lost in America. So my best friend is first generation Chinese American. So her parents immigrated from China at some point in their lives. And her mom is chock full of like weird Asian wisdom that I can't even wrap my head around. And she would cook the strangest things when she came to visit. It was great. But more recently, Mamie was telling me that her mom and her husband or partner, the husband was having symptoms of low testosterone. And the doctor wanted to give him testosterone shots. And Mamie's mom was like, no, 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 no. I know what to do. And so I guess the husband is an avid hunter and he brings home like a deer every so often. And Pat, Mamie's mom, instructed him to save the testicles of the animal. And she cooked them and served them, I think mixed in with something else. I don't think he knew what he was eating.
Right.
But the symptoms of low testosterone went away.
Whoa.
Yeah. And it's like, well, that makes sense. But, you know, that's like ancient wisdom and shit. Meanwhile, in this country, we would just run and get the shot. For the record, I think my husband would personally shrivel up and die before he ate. I think he would take the injection just 10 times over without a shadow of a doubt in my mind. But, you know, if you're willing to go the extra mile, you can do surprising things nutritionally.
Yeah, for sure. Gotta love it. I feel like that Mamie's mom like is maybe wanting like a grandchild or something, like going the extra mile to get the tea up or something hilarious like that. I feel like that's...
Well, no, so this was Pat's husband, not Mamie's husband.
Well, okay. No, I'm confused. Yeah. Okay. You get where I was saying what I was saying.
I don't know. Like,
I know. I thought
no
you were
judgment.
saying it was Mamie's husband that she was giving the...
No.
Okay.
No, it was her own
so
spouse
funny.
that she was giving this to. But
so she doesn't want that's
I get. Maybe she just wanted a good time herself.
Yeah, I know. True.
Go, girl. You get them, girl.
Yeah.
You go.
I
know. Women empowerment and whatnot. Now, how do we recover from eating deer testicles? Because I feel like this episode has taken a big turn.
That's all right. Well, again, I think, I think one thing I mentioned at the beginning that's probably good to circle back on is like, I don't really think there's going to be people that are going to have outright pellagra typically. I think there could be like maybe some milder versions of that when there is a little bit of more deficiency. Again, maybe it is something like a little bit of diarrhea or like a little bit of fatigue, like you were saying before, a little bit of some skin stuff that's like not going away or struggling to heal,
brain fog,
right,
slow metabolism.
So again, I think that's something to keep in mind is like you're probably not going to have an outright deficiency. One thing in terms of getting the niacin in, and it's one reason that I liked this Chris Masterjohn video too, shout out to him again, is he talks about tiers. So which I never heard him say before in any of his other stuff, but I thought it was really cool. So like basically tier 1 is if you eat like 1 dose of the food, it'll cover your whole niacin intake. Or if tier 2 is like, you would need 2 servings of that food to equal your whole niacin. So like he starts out with the things that would lead to a lot of niacin without much effort. What do you think one of the first ones was?
Oh, beef liver.
Yes,
for sure.
Liver was one. And then one that he did say in that category was nutritional yeast. He talks about that a frequent amount, but nutritional yeast does have a high amount of niacin, even unfortified. So that could be one too, even if you're vegetarian, vegan, and sticking more towards plant foods, you might be able to get away with like having, I think he said like maybe 2 teaspoons of it.
Okay, so not a ton.
Or 2 tablespoons, I think 2 tablespoons. So I think it was a large amount. I think he was like, oh yeah, it is a significant amount, but like doable. So he was talking about that. Things like legumes, pulses, that kind of stuff can be fairly high too. But again, he talks about properly preparing those helps to extract more niacin. So something to think about too if you are maybe more lower in protein, working harder to try to extract more from the niacin rich plant foods you're eating might be beneficial. But yeah, I know you had mentioned some other options with the meat, essentially.
Yeah. Well, and again, like I pulled that from the textbook I've got here, and then I also pulled up an NIH fact sheet about niacin, and similarly, beef liver right at the tippy top.
Yeah.
Recurring theme for these episodes, guys. Like beef liver is high in pretty much everything that you could ever dream of. So if you can muster a way to get that in your mouth, go for it.
Right.
Then, according to this list, so it's beef liver, then chicken breast, then, funny enough, marinara sauce, which that didn't pop up in the book, but marinara sauce, like spaghetti sauce, ready to serve 1 cup, is about 10 milligrams of niacin.
Yeah.
Which is actually, that's the highest of the plant foods that I have yet to see. And then, you get into like turkey, salmon, tuna, pork, beef. And then you start getting into, rice, peanuts, fortified cereal, potatoes. So again, is it possible to get enough niacin with a vegetarian or vegan diet? Yes. It's just, you don't get to be the lazy lackadaisical vegan who's like, I'm just eating the healthiest diet I know in my heart of hearts, and I'm not going to measure anything. Like, you just want to super double check that you're eating the healthiest diet ever,
Right.
And I say that as somebody who was a vegetarian for a lot of years, and I fell into that trap of believing that I had an intrinsically healthy, perfect diet because I was a vegetarian. So I didn't need to do any sort of assessment. I didn't need to work with a nutritionist or dietitian or do food tracking because I knew in my heart of hearts that my diet was good. And I'll tell you, looking back, there was room for improvement. Had I just gotten over that little ego trip and just sucked it up and actually measured shit.
Well, and I even think, even if you are eating meat, if you're deficient in iron, B2, B6, you could have a hard time converting that tryptophan. So like, even if you're like, I eat meat, I'm good. You want to make sure you're getting other micronutrients that are going to support that conversion. But yeah, have you ever had people that are doing like high dose niacin? There's kind of some groups of people that you see doing this, like
cholesterol and that sort of thing.
Cholesterol, anti-aging. So it's like an anti-aging supplement. It's shown to lengthen telomeres, probably because it helps repair DNA.
Okay. Yeah.
And so some people will do like really fancy anti-aging stuff with niacin.
So this is new news to me. I guess I'm not in that corner of TikTok and Instagram. Like I'm not getting I get K-pop videos, cute animal videos, and I also get a lot of like millennial humor videos on my feed. It's great. So, talking about how devastated we are as a community that Forever 21 is going out of business. May they rest in peace. So, stuff like that. I'm not in the anti-aging sector of Instagram, thankfully. But gather around, children. It's time for story time with Nikki. Are you ready? I don't know if I told you this story. So, funny enough, one of the symptoms of niacin deficiency can also be cold hands and feet, or like cold intolerance, I guess. That was mentioned on the Nutrivore website. And I remember, so I've had cold hands and feet for as long as I can remember. I've checked my thyroid. My iron is not that low. Like there's a little room for improvement, but it's not that low. I can't for the life of me figure out why my hands and feet are generally cold, but that's been a recurring theme. And I remember years and years ago, I went to an Apex Energetics seminar and I heard Datis Karazian, who is a very good salesperson. Brilliant, but a good salesperson. And he was talking about their brand new product nitric balance. And he did a whole lecture on nitric oxide and how super cool it is. Side note, we need to do an episode on that coming up because it is actually fascinating. But he did this whole lecture on nitric oxide, why it's important, why it's the biggest deal ever. And he introduced this new product and I was sold. I was like, done deal, sign my ass up. So I got some nitric balance, brought it home, and I started fiddling with it. And Deficiency's kind of method of using supplements, generally speaking, is start at a low dose and then titrate up and just see what happens and keep going until you feel something. So I started with a normal amount, like 5 milliliters, like a teaspoon or something of nitric balance. Didn't feel anything. Tried going up, didn't feel anything. And they talk about this like, oh, the lights will be brighter and like your brain will come alive. It'll be grand. So I'm waiting for that. So I played with it for a few days and I went from like a teaspoon up and I'm continually increasing the dose. And I'm like, all right, the T said to keep going. So no joke. I chugged, like 6 ounces of the stuff or something, like a lot. I mean, I was gulping it down.
Yeah.
Amy. It was deranged. But this was at the height of, by the way, all of my like gut health problems too. I thought, ooh, if I get blood flow to the gut, this will heal my leaky gut. So that was part of it. But I chugged the stuff. And then I went about the rest of my evening and my roommates and I were all puttering around the apartment making dinner. And as I kind of went into the kitchen, all of a sudden I could feel my face was red hot. And I was like, whoa, what's going on? And I ran to the bathroom and my face was like fire engine red. And I freaked out. And I told my roommates, I was like, oh my God, I think I'm having an allergic reaction to some of the food. Because we were all kind of like sampling and tasting each other's food that we were making. And I was like, oh my God, I'm having an allergic reaction. I'm going to sit right here on the couch. Keep an eye on me, guys. And if my throat closes up, take me to the hospital.
Right.
And I was genuinely convinced that I was going to keel over. And eventually maybe like 20 minutes later or something, it went away. And it was a little while later that I figured out, that was baby's first niacin flush. But it was alarming. And ironically, I was using my cold ass hands to try to cool down my boiling hot lava face. So it did nothing for my cold hands. Nothing. All of the blood flow just went only to my face. So anyway, that is my personal experience with high-dose niacin. Supposedly, the niacin they use in that particular product is the non-flushing kind, but I'm here to tell you that you can flush if you chug it hard enough. Right. So
you just gotta
be aware.
Gotta really give it your all to get the
you
flush.
Gotta be dedicated. You gotta chug 6 ounces of nitric balance, which is the nastiest tasting thing you'll ever taste in your life, by the way, just so that you know. Well, maybe colonoscopy prep would win marginally, but
oh boy.
Yeah. So what were you gonna say?
Yeah, I was going to say, mostly like if you're taking niacin in like a B complex or a multi or something like that, I don't think you're usually going to run into like problems with it. You'll just
if you take enough, you will.
Right. But usually, again, like if you're taking a reasonable dose, that's not like a niacin specific supplement. But niacin can be toxic in really high amounts. It can be sort of more toxic to the liver. So, people that are experimenting with it for cholesterol related issues or anti-aging might want to be a little careful with it. Just because, it can be a little bit more toxic in high amounts if you don't know what you're doing with it. Some supplements, again, can be pretty benign if you're experimenting with it. I don't know. I don't think I would take mega doses of niacin because you don't want to age, without support.
I think that it's kind of a recurring theme that I've seen is that if you take something, whether it be a nutrient or an herb, and you take it in a dose that is in the realm of reason for like most people, or in the realm of what you could maybe possibly theoretically get from food, then you're probably going to be totally fine with it. But if you pump these like quasi-pharmaceutical doses of niacin, shit's going to get weird.
Right.
And I think that would go for a lot of nutrients. I know like some nutrients don't really have an upper limit to them. You could theoretically keep pumping them up, but if you pump yourself full of vitamin A, at some point you're going to run into trouble with that. And niacin, similarly could be hepatotoxic at really high doses. There's probably other issues with it that I forgot now. But yeah, when you're using it kind of quasi-pharmaceutically, you do have to be a little bit careful.
Yeah. Yep.
And then you see people, especially in like the biohacking community, where I'm sure you've seen people like this in your practice too, but like we had somebody in FODMAP Freedom, I think in the fall, and she was one of those. She spent her life biohacking and researching all of her SNPs and MTHFR and all of the things. And she was on individual pills for basically every single vitamin and mineral and a fiber and she had like 900 supplements, I swear to God. And so that was part of the recommendation for her, was to chill out and just drop out a lot of those damn supplements.
Right.
So I think there are probably people in this community who could be taking too much niacin at supplemental doses because, they read something about methylation and they thought that they needed it. But if you're taking like a B complex or a multi, or if you're getting it from food, or if you're taking a normal human dose of something like nitric balance, then you probably won't run into too many issues with that.
Right.
It's usually done pretty intentionally when you take those mega doses.
Yeah. I also think with niacin, a couple other things to mention. There isn't like as much as other nutrients in terms of like really specific like gut lining microbiome type research. But there is some like on animals. I know they had some on fish. They've had some on pigs when I've been doing research on my book. Like generally what they found, which again shouldn't be a shock, is that niacin sufficient diet basically helps to regulate the immune system in the gut in particular. So it seems to help create a much better like immune reaction gut wise. So like the cytokine shifting is much more beneficial. So you have a lot more anti-inflammatory response versus an inflammatory response gut wise. And there isn't tons of research. I think there's only like 1 or 2 studies on the microbiome effects, but lactobacillus does seem to increase with more niacin. And then there was one bug that sort of decreased. I think it was called Peptococcus. I don't know tons about that, but that bug decreased. They found that. And then that there was more butyrate production in a niacin adequate gut. So just something to think about. Like pretty much every nutrient, if you look into it and there is a gut lining or like gut centric study, usually it's like, oh, it helps with the gut function better. Just, I think most nutrients that I've researched show that. And niacin is no different. There seems to be positive benefits gut wise.
Yeah. Well, and whether it's directly affecting the gut or indirectly, too, it's pretty clear that niacin is tremendous for the gut. So, as you mentioned, and it's funny because I had just pulled up this research article to say the same thing, is that niacin seems to inhibit inflammatory cytokines and help the immune system function better. Which you get like the immune system, like every other cell of your body needs ATP, it needs energy. So with niacin being so important for energy regulation and production, like it makes total sense. Niacin is also involved in the recycling of glutathione, which we mentioned in a previous episode, I think with riboflavin. So that's another consideration, is that glutathione is a big detoxifier. It also is really important for the immune system. And it's one of those things that tells the immune system, hey man, calm down. You don't have to have a million food sensitivities, a million allergies, a million histamine reactions, a million weirdo reactions to everything. Like you can just calm down.
Right.
Like that's kind of glutathione's role, is increasing tolerance And it also can help mount an appropriate Th1, like kind of antiviral, anti-critter response, which is great. So I think between the anti-inflammatory effects, the glutathione recycling, again, the immune system just needing ATP to function, like there's a lot of reason why niacin is important for immune function. And I'll put this plug out. I think everybody and their brother now understands that the gut affects the immune system, right?
Yeah.
Like you hear people, especially in autoimmune and like allergenic kind of sectors of the wellness space, talk about, oh, if you just get your gut microbiome right, then your eczema will go away or your Hashimoto's will go away. And that's awesome. Like, I'm glad that that is more of a thing now. However, the thing that basically nobody's talking about is that immune function can directly impact gut function. So it is a two-way street, people.
Yeah.
So even if you don't give a rat's ass about your immune system and you don't have any autoimmunity or allergenic or histamine problems, you should still care about immune function, because your immune cells and what they're choosing to make, whether it's inflammatory cytokines or histamine, really is going to affect gut function and the microbiome, how effectively your immune system is managing critters in the gut. You know, are you in a state of healing or are you in a state of breaking tissues down? It's a pretty big deal, let alone whatever direct effects it might have on the gut microbiome. And then, as we mentioned before, energy production being very important for brain function and therefore gut-brain axis. So really, I think that every function in the gut is probably touched by niacin in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, for sure.
She's important. She's a big deal.
She's beauty and she's grace. She's Miss Niacin.
Is this intentionally a miscongeniality reference? Because I'm going to have to go back and watch that movie now. That's what it
just came up natural.
Well,
just came up natural.
That I appreciate that millennial reference. Sandra Bullock at her finest.
Yes.
People. Work of art, that movie. But all right. Do you have any closing remarks about niacin other than
I think that song was that song was my closing remark, maybe.
Yeah.
I'll just leave it at that. She's beauty and
I don't
she's
think
grace.
we can outdo that. I think my closing remark is don't be a silly goose and don't overdose yourself on nitric ballads or other niacin-containing supplements. That's my friendly reminder. Also, don't drink the creek water, people.
Yes.
If you don't know that reference, go back and watch episode 1 of this podcast, and you will be enlightened why I say that. But all right. Well, I know we have some guests coming up, and I don't remember where they're going to fall into the lineup here. But soon, when it's just the two of us, we will be talking about pantothenic acid, aka vitamin B5. So stay tuned, and we will catch you on the flippity flip.